Ask Me Anything by Radical. Over the past 30 years I've witnessed over 1,000 deaths. I've realized life's precarious nature and appreciate its preciousness. Ask me anything. Hi Reddit. My name is Frank Ostaseski. I've spent the past 30 years sitting bedside with a few thousand people as they took their final breaths. In 1987, I co-founded the Zen Hospice project, the first Buddhist hospice in America. In 2005, I founded the Metta Institute to train healthcare clinicians and family caregivers in mindful and compassionate approaches to end-of-life care. Some people that I companioned came to their deaths full of disappointment and turned toward the wall in hopelessness. Others blossomed and stepped through that door full of wonder. All of them were my teachers. These people invited me into their most vulnerable moments and made it possible for me to get up close and personal with death. In the process, they taught me how to live. I wrote about those lessons and more in my book The 5 Invitations, Discovering What Death Can Teach Us About Living Fully. You can read more about it here if you'd like. www.5invitations.com. If you want the TLDR of the book, the main points are: don't wait, welcome everything, push nothing away, bring your whole self to an experience, find a place to rest in the middle of things, cultivate a don't know mind. Happy to explore those in more detail or anything else you'd like to talk about. Ask me anything. My proof. imgur.com link. Update. Thanks everyone for the great questions. This has been a ton of fun, but I've got to sign off for now. Thanks again. Is there a discernible difference between how atheists and religious people handled their approaching death? This is a beautiful reflection and your Ask Me Anything has become one of my favorites. As someone who's said goodbye to a lot of loved ones over the past few years, I've witnessed firsthand how hard it is for people to accept mortality as a fundamental and universal human experience. Thanks for putting yourself out there. How would you show someone that life is precious and worth living? Specifically someone going through tough times and negativity in their life. I once worked with a man who wanted to take his life because of his terminal lung cancer. Right before he died he said, "I am happier now than I have ever been." He told me his joy didn't come from things or the activities of life but from his attention. He said, "Now my pleasure comes from the softness of the sheets and the coolness of the breeze." Bringing our attention to the details of life, we often discover a gratitude for simply being alive. How often do you think of your own death? How do you keep this in mind when small things piss you off? Yes, I think about my death often. When I'm in contact with the precariousness of life, it causes me to appreciate its preciousness. Then I don't want to waste a moment. I want to step in fully and use my life in a responsible way, without a reminder of death. We tend to take life for granted, often becoming lost in endless pursuits of self-gratification. When we keep death at our fingertips, it reminds us not to hold on to life too tightly. Maybe we take ourselves and our ideas a little less seriously. We let go a little more easily. When we recognize that death comes to everyone, we appreciate that we are all in the same boat, together. This helps us to become a bit kinder and gentler with one another. What was the most common disappointment that everyone shared? Have you ever felt overwhelmed by all the deaths you have witnessed? Not having loved fully is the most common disappointment. Sure, at times I feel overwhelmed. When I'm working with some of his dying, I'm always looking at my own fear, my own grief. But I've learned that when I'm aware fear, it means there is a part of me who can relate to the fear. That means fear is not the only thing in the room. We can relate from fear or from our capacity to witness our fear. Death is the elephant in the room. A truth we all know but agree not to talk about. We try to keep it at arm's length. We project our worst fears onto it, joke about it, attempt to manage it with euphemisms, sidestep it when possible, or avoid the conversation altogether. We can run, but we cannot hide. We can run, but we cannot hide. There is an old Babylonian myth, Appointment in Samara, which W. Somerset Maugham retells in his play Sheppy. A merchant in Baghdad sends his servants to the marketplace for supplies, but the man returns a short while later empty-handed, pale, and shuddering with fear. He tells his boss that a woman in the crowd bumped into him. When he looked at her more closely, he recognized her as Death. She looked at me and made a threatening gesture. The servant says, "Now, lend me your horse, and I will ride away from this city and avoid my fate. I will go to Samara and there, Death will not find me." So the merchant lends his servant his horse. The man rides off in a wild fury. Later, the merchant goes to the marketplace to buy his own supplies. There, he sees Death and asks why she threatened his servant earlier that day. That was not a threatening gesture. Death replies, "It was only a start of surprise. I was astonished to see him in Baghdad, for I had an appointment with him tonight in Samara." What are your thoughts on physician-assisted suicide? Sorry, I answered this question last night but it didn't get saved. Physician-assisted death differs from suicide. It's now legal in 5 states: California, Colorado, District of Columbia, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington. Death with dignity can refer to an end-of-life option that allows certain eligible individuals to legally request and obtain medications from their physician to end their life in a peaceful, humane manner. To qualify for a prescription of medication under existing physician-assisted dying laws, you must be 1. An adult resident of California, Colorado, District of Columbia, Oregon, Vermont, or Washington. 2. Mentally competent, that is, capable of making and communicating your healthcare decisions. 3. Diagnosed with a terminal illness that will lead to death within 6 months. Oregon's Death with Dignity Act, DWDA, enacted in late 1997. Thousands of people have actively and directly requested information. Thousands more indirectly. In the 20 years since the law was passed, a total of 1,545 people have received prescriptions written under the DWDA, and 991 patients have died from ingesting the medications. That is an average of 49.5 people per year. Many people feel it gives more agency to individuals dealing with terminal illnesses. One side benefit is the laws is that pain management and symptom control seems to have improved in those states that allow physician-assisted death. What are your thoughts on people using psychedelics towards the end of life to ease anxiety? Fair. There is a lot of good research demonstrating that the appropriate use of certain psychedelics like MDMA and psilocybin can be very effective in reducing existential anxiety. I suggest you check out Maps.org link. What in your opinion would be the ideal way to die? Ideally awake, with pain and symptoms skillfully addressed, content with my life, companioned by people I love who don't interfere with the process or try to hold me back, resting in a more open awareness. However, I think that grasping at a certain outcome may be a formula for suffering. My hope is that I can work with whatever cards I am dealt. In Buddhism, the old Pali word for suffering is dukkha, which is sometimes translated as anguish or more simply as unsatisfactoriness or even stress. Dukkha arises from ignorance, from not understanding that everything is impermanent, unreliable, and ungraspable, and wanting it to be otherwise. We wish to claim our possessions, our relationships, and even our identities as unchanging. But we can't. All are constantly transforming and slipping right through our fingers. We think we need the conditions of our lives to reliably give us what we want. We want to construct an ideal future or nostalgically relive a perfect past. We mistakenly believe this will make us happy. But we all can see that even those people who realize extraordinary conditions in life still suffer. Even if we are rich, beautiful, smart, in perfect health, and blessed with wonderful families and friendships, in time these will break down, be destroyed, and change. Or we will simply lose interest. On some level, we know this is the case, yet we can't seem to stop grasping for those perfect conditions. Did any of them confess horrible crimes or tell you where their massive quantity of treasure was buried? No buried treasures, but yes, confessions of all types. When you were little, did any of your family members or anyone you know die? For me, when I was little, and still, death is something for me that is less morbid but in a way confusing and or puzzling. The idea that someone or something just stopped. Have you ever felt this way or have seen family members or the patients in hospice that have this same feeling? Death and I have been longtime companions. My mother died when I was a teenager and my father just a few years later, but I had lost them years before the events of their deaths. They were both alcoholics, and so my childhood was characterized by years of chaos, neglect, violence, misguided loyalty, guilt, and shame. I became adept at walking on eggshells, being my mother's confidant, finding hidden liquor bottles, clashing with my father, keeping secrets, and growing up too quickly. So in a way, their deaths came as a relief. My suffering was a sword that cut two ways. I grew up feeling ashamed, frightened, lonely, and unlovable. Yet that same suffering helped me to empathetically connect with others' pain, and that became part of my calling to move toward situations that many others tend to avoid. Exploring our own hurt, in addition to contributing to our healing, helps us feel empathy for others who have suffered similar injuries. What are the common regrets that people have before they pass? Thanks for doing this Ask Me Anything. It's very insightful. You are welcome. Happy to share what I have learned. It's my way of honoring the lessons people taught me as they died. Bonnie Ware wrote a good book on this subject. Bronniere.com link. Personally, I'm more interested in how people transform as they die. How the dying process can be conducive to expansion. Dying is inevitable and intimate. I have seen ordinary people at the end of their lives develop profound insights and engage in a powerful process of transformation that helps them to emerge as someone larger, more expansive, and much more real than the small, separate selves they had previously taken themselves to be. This is not a fairy tale happy ending that contradicts the suffering that came before, but rather a transcendence of tragedy. The discovery of this capacity regularly occurs for many people in the final months, days, or sometimes even minutes of life. Too late, you might say, and I might agree. However, the value is not in how long they enjoyed the experience, but the possibility that such transformation exists. Lessons from death are available to all those who choose to move toward it. I have witnessed a heart opening occurring in not only people near death, but also their caregivers. They found a depth of love within themselves that they didn't know they had access to. They discovered a profound trust in the universe and the reliable goodness of humanity that never abandoned them, regardless of the suffering they encountered. If that possibility exists at the time of dying, it exists here and now. In the deaths you have witnessed, have you heard complaints or talk about hearing or seeing things that weren't there? I've heard voices and scratches on the walls minutes before an elderly lady passed. She said she saw people crowding the room when it was only a handful of us in there. This has been haunting me for quite some time and I wanted to know if it, or something similar, has ever happened to you. Edit. Typo. It's quite common for people to have vivid dreams about relatives or friends who have died. Sometimes people see or hear things that as companions we cannot see or hear. There are many thoughts on the causes. Some say medications. Others say confusion due to illness. Others speak of near-death type experiences. The question I ask is, are these visions disturbing or comforting to the person? Then I try to support them through their reactions. Any patterns in how their surviving family members coped? Survivors cope best when they realize that grief has many faces. Sadness is just one of the many faces of grief. I find it useful to think of grief as a constellation of responses, an ever-changing process. The author C.S. Lewis, after the death of his wife, wrote, "No one told me grief felt so much like fear. Our grief manifests as anger, self-judgment, regret, and guilt. We experience loneliness and relief, blame and shame, and periods of numbness when we feel like we are walking through molasses. Rarely are we prepared for the intense feelings that engulf us when someone we love dies. Grief cracks our defensive shell of invulnerability. It exposes the ways we hide from the truth and asks us to acknowledge what has always been here but was previously unrecognized. Our human frailty. Grief can be so powerful that instead of surrendering to its force, we reach for information and models that outline predictable stages of grief in the hopes that they will take us through our grief more easily. In so doing, we run the risk of confusing the map with the territory. Journeying through grief, it can indeed help to get familiar with the terrain, to know something of its patterns. But there is no right way to grieve, no timetable, no one path, and there certainly are no shortcuts through grief. The only way is straight through the middle. We don't get past our pain. We go through it and are transformed by it. What are the best things a family member or loved one can do at a bedside? How do you suggest helping a carer on whom rage, fear, or hatred has been vented by the decedent? When we are caring for someone who is sick, we lend them our body. We use the strength of our arms to move them from the bed to the commode. And we can also lend them the strength of our mind. We can help to create a calm and accepting environment. We can be a reminder of stability and concentration. We can expand our heart in such a way that it can inspire the individual who is dying to do likewise. When people are really sick, in the last 24 hours, slow down, move less, get quiet, watch your own breath. Help to create an environment in the room which is characterized by fearless receptivity, willingness to meet whatever arises. Do simple things with great attention. Watch the state of your own mind. It's hard, sometimes impossible, to stay present when the person who is sick is venting on the carer. Sometimes we need to set boundaries. We tend to lose ourselves when others are angry with us. Telling the emotional truth can help. Expressing disinterest in the unsolicited advice or criticism. Using humor. Staying connected to your physical center. Harnessing your strength. All these strategies can help us stay connected to ourselves. Sometimes we need to speak up on our own behalf. "Don't speak to me that way," she said, her voice strong and confident. "It hurts me when you talk to me like that, and it doesn't help me do any better." It takes practice. How does it affect you? Doing a job where all day, every day, you're constantly around people who are dying? Thanks for watching this radical video. Subscribe for the best Reddit videos straight to your feed 3 times a day.